everybody. I'm Paul Wilkie from Upright Position Communications, and we have a special edition today. We're talking cybersecurity because October is Cybersecurity Month. Thanks for joining us today. We've got three great panelists to talk cybersecurity. We have Jason Rebholz, CISO for Corvus Insurance, Art Ocain, Vice President of Service Delivery for Airiam, and Conor Quinlan, CEO of Airiam. Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So my name is Jason Rebholz. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Corvus Insurance. So for me, born and raised in incident response, I spent over a decade responding to a variety of different types of incidents, from nation-state threat actors to hacktivists to organized crime, and now focused on securing internal networks and helping our policyholders who buy cyber insurance from Corvus.
I'm so grateful you're here. Art, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Art Ocain. I'm VP of Service Delivery for Airiam. What that means is really I'm responsible for our incident response team, as well as all of our projects, and really anything that we deliver to our customers on an ongoing basis.
And Conor, take us home on the intro side.
I'm Conor Quinlan. I'm the CEO of Airiam. My job is empowering our teams to keep our customers resilient. Really, that's my focus, is making sure on a day-to-day basis, what are we doing to ensure our clients can stand back up?
And thank you all for joining us today and for being part of this discussion. So the National Cybersecurity Alliance is highlighting four key themes for this year: enabling multi-factor authentication, the use of strong passwords and a password manager, updating software, and recognizing and reporting phishing. Now, we're going to talk about all of these and more today, but to get the ball rolling, I'd like to ask all of you, and anyone kind of dive in, where among these areas are you seeing businesses falling short right now?
I think all of them, but mostly phishing. Most of the attacks are actually happening there at the beginning. So if we solve that problem, whether it's through technology, training, combination of them, or find some other way to short circuit it, maybe different authentication mechanisms that phishing doesn't really capture, that would solve the problem for a lot of these attacks. But that being said, patching is hugely important too, because that's giving a vulnerability to the attacker to use to get around your network and get into your network. And MFA is really that control that is there to help with that phishing situation. But yeah, ultimately, I think phishing is the biggest one.
Yeah, there's a reason why these four are bubbling up, right? It's because they are all very important. So I'm on the same page with Art there. Each of them play an important role in security. And so my background in incident response, I always think about things in what is the attack? How is a hacker going to try to break into the environment? What are they going to do when they get in? And so, yeah, when we're looking at how attackers are breaking in, you're looking at phishing as one of the primary mechanisms. You're looking at exploits for vulnerable software being one of those initial entry points. And so you need to weigh these things together. And most importantly, I think this is one of the things that a lot of people forget, is there is no silver bullet in cybersecurity. And so you can rank these and prioritize them accordingly, but you have to be hitting aspects of all of them. Otherwise, you're just opening yourself up to an attack, and maybe, an even larger attack than it could have been had you had a few pieces, the core intent behind these recommendations.
I would agree. I think just the challenge is, a lot of people sort of began before with, I need to check a couple boxes, right? Or maybe it's not me that's going to be attacked. Right now, it's continuous improvement, right? You take care of one of these, you're circling back on this one later. Right. So I think that's also the challenge for organizations is, obviously you need manpower to execute on these things. You need finances, you need buy-in from, the CEO. Right. And so the good news is there's pressure in the industry from compliance and from insurance carriers. And I'm applauding both because they're actually helping service providers like us take care of these things for customers. But it really needs to become business as usual, like the baseline of business. Right. Eventually, we all had to have internet to be a company, right? Now we have to have serious cybersecurity practices to be a company. But that doesn't just mean because you want it, it happens. It's an effort, and it's money, people, and process.
And Conor, I think one of the interesting things there is when you have a situation where you're reading from a checklist, it becomes kind of counterintuitive, right? Because let's go and say, hey, we're going to enable multi-factor authentication, right? 3 or 4 years ago, people would do that and everyone would cheer. But today, you need somebody like Art in your corner so that you can say, okay, great, I need MFA, but what's the right way to implement that? And what is the most secure way? And so you were almost reading the book cover, and you need that expertise to say, okay, great, I know what the title of the book is, but I'm not going to get the full plot line unless I open the book and actually start reading what some of these chapters are about, or reading that first chapter. And so that's where, things in security, you need to go deeper on it. And you don't need to necessarily go all the way to the bottom of the pool, but you need to be able to go deep enough where you can understand not only how do I meet this, but how do I do it right? And that's where Art comes in and says, hey, I know how to do this, right? And I know how to set this up the right way. Because if you just go and do MFA, not all forms of MFA are created equal.
One of the things you said, Jason, that earlier was about layering defenses, so that defense in depth approach. And one of the things Conor said was kind of, or allured to, was the recursive nature of this, is that it has to be an ongoing thing. I think that's one of the challenges right now in implementing these, is that it's not even by listing these 4 things for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, it seems like this is it. And I don't want companies to think that. And if they check off these things, they're good. This is really a starting point, and that we have to constantly be improving, because these controls that we put in place today are almost irrelevant in 6 months. And cybersecurity budgets are starting to feel that. I'm sure corporate boards are concerned about that, because they're constantly asking, are we secure? And there's not a great answer to that other than we're handling the risks we know about, or we're handling the risks we can afford to handle right now. At some point, we are vulnerable in some way.
Jason, you raised a good point earlier, talking about companies need someone like Art in their corner. But I'd like to talk a little bit about having an insurance company in company's corner too, because you think about cybersecurity, you think about cybersecurity companies like Airiam. Insurance is always the first place to go. So for those watching who might not know about Corvus Insurance, tell us a little bit about how you work with customers and people like Airiam and partnerships and what you guys do.
I think it's interesting with cyber insurance. Insurance tends to get a bit of a bad rap as being a stodgy old industry, but it's the one thing that you want in your corner when you are going through an incident, because there's resources available there, not only from the reimbursement aspect, but also from an expertise. With Corvus Insurance, we are a modern day cyber insurance carrier, meaning that we're bringing technology to bear to better understand and predict risk in organizations. For Corvus policyholders, they get access to scanning technology that helps highlight what are the inherent risks in your organization? And we help create a more frictionless insurance experience, because nobody likes going through the insurance process. So we bring technology to bear to help ease that burden and just make it a more delightful experience. And working more closely with our partners, like Airiam, with Conor, and with Art, so that we can help advise and guide our policyholders in the right direction. And
risk prediction is something important, I know, to Airiam as well. So Conor, I'd love to talk to you about how Airiam works with its customers. Would you mind walking us through how you work with a customer that needs recovery from a cyber attack compared with one that's being proactive?
Sure. So I think we work diligently with every customer to be resilient. And I think that's one of the focuses we have that might be a little bit different. Is people might be frustrated by me saying this, but cybersecurity, right? This proactive sort of preventative wall that everyone's talking about, these boxes to check, is great and it's necessary. And people are talking about security operations center, but I'm really trying to focus my organization on resilience, right? Because at the end of the day, carriers like Jason's are wondering, how do you stand back up, right? Because that's where the damages are, right? So we operate with the assumption with our clients, doomsday is coming, all the walls are down. How do you recover from that sort of stuff? And we've really focused our organization there because of the thousands and thousands of hours we've spent on the front lines recovering large organizations throughout the US from extremely terrible ransomware situations. So we start with resilience first. I think that's a good place to be. Obviously, the assumption is sort of in IT and cybersecurity, productivity is an assumption. They should run on systems that run, right? That's the expectation of our industry now. If there's anything less, then that's of concern. So for our existing customers, we're really focused on having continual conversations around resilience. Sometimes those conversations are difficult. Not all customers are ready to go where we want them to go, and all of them are on some continuum based on where they are in terms of industry, based on where they are in terms of maturity or financial structure. So now, when it comes to future customers, and I like to call them future customers that we may engage with on a recovery, right? Sort of how that starts is, we typically work with a partner or a carrier or someone who's bringing us in. And I want to be specific. Our organization at Airiam is focused on putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, right? We do recovery. There are great organizations out there, CrowdStrike, Red Canary, Kroll, that we work that do the forensic work in a project, and we work hand in hand, right? And great incident managers like MOXFIVE that we work with and other firms that we're all working together to put a client back together. But we start out really trying to focus on containment and quarantine, because unless we have a safe, hygienic place to begin the recovery, we really can't begin, right? So that's first and foremost. And that, is a little bit of a dance of, do we have that all set up? That's sort of happening in those first 72 hours. Then on top of that, once we have containment, we're working with a client to figure out what are the priority systems. These could be revenue, hey, I need to be able to get this system up to be able to bill customers. I may need to be able to check people into a hotel, right? I may need payroll to run. So that's where we're working, build the priority systems, kind of get the critical things up and running as fast as we can to either get the organization communicating or driving revenue into the business, right? And I'm not saying that's a checklist, believe me. Most of these situations look like a battlefield, right? There's people headed to the hospital. There's people quitting. There's people freaking out, right? Because some people haven't slept. That's where we come in. And our hope is, right, to really facilitate the ease of that process for the organization that we're working with. Then after we sort of dealt with the priority systems, we start to look at what are the other systems down the line that are important, and to work with the organization to think about, okay, we're getting to a safer place now. We're kind of coming out of this. What are we going to do so this doesn't happen again? And that typically will be interfacing with the carrier, asking for, okay, this is what's got us here. Did we take care of a lot of the core problems, right? And how will this be managed in the future so that we don't end up here again?
Conor and the rest of you, I want to sort of dive into that resilience concept a bit more. Art, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the trends that companies might not be thinking about right now?
I think the idea of cyber resiliency engineering is actually, even though it's existed for the last 10 years, nobody's really been focusing on it. Everybody's been focusing on prevention. Right now, especially in the last 2 years, I think that corporate America is starting to wake up to the fact that everybody's going to get hacked. And now we need to turn to resilience. MITRE has a cyber resiliency engineering framework. A lot of people don't know it exists. It focuses on anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt. And it's really focused on how to bounce back from an attack, how to learn from that attack and take care of the next one that may be coming down the pipe, but how to keep your organization running despite the fact that you're under constant attack. So that's one of them. The other thing that companies are really experiencing now as a trend is IoT attacks and OT attacks. And a lot of that is just nation state pressure right now. Most ransomware threat actors aren't focusing as heavily on OT, but I think now they're starting to realize that that's an open door and there's a way in through that. But if you think about the number of manufacturers there are in the US and the amount of IoT devices there are on the internet, there's a lot of ways to get into a network now because of these devices. And most of them are supporting important things that have been around for a long time. And, on the manufacturing floor, these are cranking out widgets, and they're important for factories. They're important for critical infrastructure. They're running the water treatment centers in our country. But nobody's really paid attention to securing them until the last year. And now we're realizing what kind of technical debt we have. And I think a lot of the wake-up call is just the frequency of the attacks. Now there's additional industry pressure, which is important because that's kind of forcing everybody to move in the same direction. There's changes in compliance. There's the new FTC safeguards. There's CMMC, things like that are really kind of forcing the issue. CISO is getting more heavily involved now, so we're seeing just more pressure in general. But I think one of the things that's really a factor that's helping a lot is insurance companies are forcing the issue. So insurance companies are saying, listen, we need you to have these controls in place now, where a couple of years ago, they would just sign any policy. Now they're realizing that their risk is so high because of these things on people's networks that they're actually forcing an evolution to happen. And that's critical right now, but that's the trend we're seeing.
And Jason, to Art's point that acceptance that everyone's going to be hacked is probably a blessing and a curse to the cyber insurance industry right now. How has the insurance industry's approach to cybersecurity changed in light of this in recent years?
A lot of learning. This is something where the cyber insurance market is still very young, especially when you consider just how old other areas of insurance are. And so, with ransomware, that was the first real time where we saw a significant change in attacker tactics, right? You go historically, Art called out nation state threats, right? They've always existed ever since a computer was made, even well before that with espionage. But the mode of the game was always around stealth. When ransomware came onto the scene, it was much more brutal, right? And so we saw larger impact. We saw downtime. We saw extortion demands. And so when extortion came into play here, that changed the name of the game completely, because now we have more people who want to get into it, more attackers who want to get into this game, lower barrier to entry, and that just results in losses all around. And so for the insurance industry, very much so a situation, in order to make an omelet, you got to break a couple eggs. Well, there was probably a couple hundred eggs that got broken there, while insurance carriers started to learn the different tactics that were happening and how to assess the risk. Right. And so that's why you look back 5-6 years ago with insurance applications, you can get an insurance policy with 5 questions. None of them had anything really to do with security. Right. Today, now that we know what the new threat landscape looks like, now we can better understand how protected are you? How resilient is your environment? And so everyone is getting smarter. Now, with that, of course, comes a little bit of pain with increased premiums and everything along those lines. But it's where we are understanding better now today how to price the risk. And more importantly, how do we start pushing some of the best controls in place for policyholders so that you can mitigate the blast radius of an attack so that, the attack's not going away, but instead of this being an attack that's going to cost $500,000 to respond to, you can get back up and running and solve the case within $100,000. And so that's what we're really striving for, is identifying those efficiencies with resilience to make sure that we can try to minimize that blast radius of an attack.
I'm glad you brought up extortion, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was, let's say I'm a medium-sized business owner and I get an extortion threat. Unfortunately, I'm not working with either Corvus Insurance or Airiam. What do I do?
You got to start with calling in the experts, right? There's this new game that's going around right now, and it angers me quite a bit. It's a game where you can pretend to be a ransom negotiator. You're not going to play a game and become an expert in this, right? So this really starts from day one. When you have an incident, you have to get in touch with people who have been through this, who know what to do, and can guide you through that. And that's where, even if you're not an existing customer of Corvus Insurance or Airiam, who are you working with? Like, do you have another insurance provider? Do you know a forensics provider? Are you working with somebody who has been through this before and really been through this? Not just saying they haven't, like actually has the reps behind them that can guide you through this, because this is just not a game that you want to play alone.
Conor, question for you. Are you seeing an emergence of more companies working together with cybersecurity support and cyber insurance, or is coordinating the two still a tough sell?
No, I think there's a lot more collaboration. I mean, a few years ago would be, we'd get a document from an insurance carrier with Jason's, said 5 questions, check this off, or they may get a compliance questionnaire, fill this out, right, kind of stuff. And now it's gotten more sophisticated. Now the questions, it's like 50 questions, right? And they've got core things that they're trying to verify. But still, the challenge is it's a transfer of paper, right? It's not a transfer of reality, right? It's just, I mean, still at the end of the day, do you have these things? Yes, I do, right? And there's some carriers like Jason's that are much more proactive, saying, cool, scan it, show me, right? And so there is collaboration. And as I said, it's helping firms like ours at least make sure that we're not reacting all the time to these big situations, right? And so now that carriers are asking for compliance to certain elements, that's helping us at least confirm and get things done that we thought would be in the best interest of the company. But I think I want to talk about my holy grail. And Art and Jason have heard me go on this thing. And so I'm just going to try. It's going to happen here. Sorry. But, so one of the key things that we have at our firm, and we bought technology, is really just having a sophisticated platform to assess vulnerabilities, right? To threat hunt, or really sort of, think of risk assessment plus XDR, right? And sort of, I don't even know some of the stuff it does. There's a lot of capability there. But Paul, you might think I don't know, State Farm is maybe your insurance carrier, and you have the app and you drive down the road, and all the time, State Farm knows if you're a terrible driver or not, and they can change your policy and you can agree to that. That's what I want for companies and carriers and providers, where there's a standard assessment of resilience readiness. Like there should be a standard for scoring, right? There should be a standard for data transfer so that carriers and compliance people, right? Regulation have a standard set of data that they can look at to assess, because there's 1,000 flavors right now and 1,000 variations of the truth. And not saying that, we have the platform to do it, but we're working towards that. And that's the goal, is where there's real-time data, anonymized potentially, right? That is coming out of these businesses, so that a firm like Jason or regulatory compliance are looking at the same things that we're looking at to take care of our customer, so that people are alerted that there's a server, right? For example, that doesn't have MDR. There's a user that's not using MFA, right? Et cetera, so that we are collaborating in real time. But I think the industry's got to evolve, and it will come, but there will be a standard and a way of sort of monitoring this in real time that gets everyone sort of looking at the same dashboard, whether it's a CISO, an IT manager, right? A carrier, an outside provider like ourselves, or else. My fear is there's just going to be so many different ways of looking at this that we're not going to be sophisticated.
I think that there's an opportunity for a lot of partnerships between cybersecurity companies and insurance here, where there's an exchange of data, but it's going to take a cultural evolution for the companies to really believe in that and want to share that data. We need to really present it in a way that it is beneficial for the insured to share that data, and maybe presenting it as a partnership between the cybersecurity company and the insurance company, all working together to really solve their problem together, because we are, and we're all on the same team. So sharing that data openly between each other is going to help us a lot.
Yeah, and at the risk of grabbing a guitar and singing Kumbaya here, this really has to be a partnership, right? And so I think that's one of the fallacies with cyber insurance, that we're all out to get you, right? And we're going to screw everyone over, and it couldn't be further from the truth, right? When you're looking at a company, their service providers who are offering them IT support or resilience, and an insurance carrier, those three people all have the same interest at heart here. Don't let that company get hacked, right? The company doesn't want to go through it because they've got the brand reputation. The companies that are supporting them, the service providers, their reputation is also on the line, as well as their contract. And insurance carriers, they have a financial interest that's aligned with all of this. They don't want to have to pay out a claim, but the contracts exist to pay it out if it happens. And so with insurance carriers in particular, as well as the service providers, we're able to sit above the fray of all the noise of cybersecurity and really dig in and really look at what are the true risks that are happening here. And with the insurance carriers, we have all of the loss data that tells us, hey, yeah, these attacks are happening this way. We know how much these things could typically cost. So that's the type of partnerships, this kind of triforce of service provider, carrier, and company, that if you're all working together and there's trust between them, that's how you can really start shifting the needle here towards, lower risk and fewer attacks, because all working together in the same direction, no one's out to get anyone in these types of situations.
Well, and I think if you take it one step further and look at today, today's September 30th, the big exploit for Microsoft Exchange was rolled out. People all over the US in our industry were just hustling, right? Do any of our clients have Exchange still? If so, are we going to, implement the URL rewrites to solve this sort of problem? Right. So we're talking about sort of the idea of like an electronic resilience record, right? Like EHR, right? But let's also think about the collaboration that could have. Why couldn't a firm like Corvus be delivering to all the cybersecurity carriers and or internal staff to say, here's the patch, right? And if you're using these 7 platforms, here's a script that you can push now. Don't think, just push it out, right? And so those are the things that even don't exist. People were on boards. Hey, how'd you solve this problem? Let me go to Reddit. Let me call my friend, right? There's not infrastructure to also push things out, because the beautiful thing is the industry is adopting standards in terms of critical vendors that are good, right? And that can really do this sort of stuff, right? These vendors are built on, great software platforms that have APIs, right? And so we haven't even started to connect all those dots to be able to say, Corvus sends out a release, people can apply that sort of stuff. That's the integration that could be there also on the front end, not just in the verification part of the process.
I want to change gears a little bit here and talk about vulnerable industries. Art, what are some of the industries most vulnerable right now?
Right now, pretty much everything in critical infrastructure is under attack. We're seeing a lot of attacks in education. That really isn't impacting economy as much as some of the other attacks. So it's not affecting production or total revenue of large corporations. So we're not hearing about it quite as much unless it's a very large school district. But most education organizations do not have security leadership. Less than half have CISOs or a director of security. So there's a real opportunity to improve that level of cybersecurity at those organizations, because they're constantly under attack. They have a lot of student data, a lot of PII, even healthcare records, a lot of information that can easily be taken and used for extortion. And it hurts those organizations, school districts, when they're down. They're not able to educate our children. They're really the least protected right now out of all these types of organizations. Really next is industry and manufacturing. They're under constant attack with IoT, with OT. There's just a lot of legacy technical debt. And again, half of them do not have any kind of security leadership in the company. So there's no way to mitigate these threats. And a lot of them are running on infrastructure that is very old. And the finance sector is a constant target because they have the money. So they're ranking right in there around manufacturing and education as far as the number of attacks. So especially smaller banks and financial advisors and things that may not have the infrastructure that a large bank, the Capital Ones and such have, are under constant attack and are losing the battle against these attackers. So those are really the 3 that are the highest right now as far as the number of attacks. But there are a lot of others that are happening to critical infrastructure as well. There are some targeted sectors like those 3, but everybody is potentially going to be a victim.
And Art, while we're recording this, of course, we've been all keeping our eyes on what's been going on in Florida. What does something like a natural disaster, how does that play a part in cybersecurity risk?
2 things. One, it's a huge resilience test, because the same kind of bounce back that you're going to do from ransomware is the same kind of bounce back you'll do in a disaster situation. As far as your electronic infrastructure, with disasters, obviously there's a human safety aspect that is added to it. But as far as the technology, restoring you to the cloud, things like that, it's the same thing. One of the problems with any kind of disaster, whether it's a cyber recovery or a natural disaster, is that in that recovery process, a lot of times the backups aren't being taken. a lot of times there aren't the security controls in place because people are in a rush to get back to work, or people are in a rush just to provide basic services to people that are in need after a disaster. So a lot of times there's not that kind of layer of security in place because people haven't planned ahead to the point that they're considering, when I stand up a temporary network at an office 15 miles down the road, what am I going to have to consider as far as security there? So that risk is definitely there, and we may see some fallout after this, this hurricane disaster because of that.
One also think you got to think back to phishing as well, right? So now we've got centers or communities that are under pressure, stressed, potentially have distraction, right? And so a lot of you'll see a spike in sort of phishing to leverage the content or the things that people may need, right? And so the click-throughs, right, that will happen because of targeted type emails hitting people because they know how to do this, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's stuff related to getting a refund or whatever. So that thing that might be personally related, in terms of putting your family back together after that, might actually be affecting an organization, right? And as the entry point, but it's just the clickbait, right? That may get someone going. So I think, there was stuff that went on during COVID that was related to this. So there's always sort of newsworthy stuff that is easily manipulated.
Jason, since you brought up phishing, it's going to be like the vampire coming into the house. You invited it in, so let's talk about it. Art, tell us what you're seeing on the phishing front? Is it the same old scams, or bad actors getting better? Are there new schemes that companies should be aware of?
There's a lot of the same. People are always going to fall for the invoice scams and things like that. There's also, as Jason posted the other day, there's the IRS was recognizing that there's a lot of IRS-faced scams right now, where it's IRS targeted things against consumers. So phishing that is pretending to be the IRS, et cetera. Social engineering is still going on, and it's almost aggressive now. On LinkedIn, you're getting social engineered. On Facebook, you're getting social engineered. You're getting social engineered via text. It's one of those situations where you really don't know who to trust. I put a post up on LinkedIn the other day asking for senior engineers to reach out to me, and I got probably 75 attachments via LinkedIn mail, and of course, am I going to open any of them? No. So it's just everyone applying for jobs is a perfect opportunity to drop some malware in there and really use social engineering, acting like they're interested in a position. There's a lot of that, but SMS and voice phishing is really spiked also. What I mean by voice phishing is people will call you and pretend they're IT and things like that and ask for information. And you tend to trust people when you're talking to them. You electronically, everybody's getting sort of trained, not everybody, but people are getting better at identifying phishing. But when someone calls you, it's a person, and they're asking for this information. They must need it, right? So it's easier to trust them and fall for that kind of phishing. That kind of stuff is what we're seeing a lot, and people are still falling for the same phishing schemes. So it's just more of the same plus some more techniques. In addition to that, MFA is really getting hit right now as far as phishing, because the attacker knows that people have MFA in place now. So they're trying to phish your MFA codes, or they're trying to send you a link that proxies around your MFA. So there are, and plus there's MFA fatigue, where you're clicking the push notification. So there's a lot of this additional stuff on top of phishing that is related to MFA that is increasing the pressure that users are having to face.
And Art, that's what scares me the most is the phishing aspect that's targeting MFA, because we were alluding to this before, right? Not all forms of MFA are created equal. And for years, we've been saying, put MFA in place, it's going to help prevent against phishing. And it absolutely does. The problem is threat actors realize this now. And so they have the toolkits that are available for purchase, by the way, or you can just subscribe to them. So it's a low barrier to entry for, some random kid to go, buy access to this and start phishing people that can then bypass a lot of the forms of MFA today. And so, thankfully, well, not thankfully, but the Uber breach really brought to light the risk of MFA. And so in that situation, you had MFA fatigue with the social engineering via a voice call, or that was via a WhatsApp, that tied it all together, right? So you had somebody, they got credentials, they started logging in as this user, it started prompting for MFA. They just did that until the user was getting annoyed. They pretended to be Uber's IT and then said, hey, approve this. We're trying to get in and help you, right? And then the attacker got in. That's the reality of what we're dealing with today. And so that's why, going back to October and the theme of MFA is still an amazing technology to help protect your account, but you have to ask that follow-up question. Well, what form of MFA, right? And that's when we start digging into phishing-resistant MFA like FIDO2, where we can really put in place technologies that are going to help prevent the current issues and help prevent, the next 2 to 3 years of attacks and where they might be going.
Yeah, I think one thing to highlight here that, Jason and Art sort of talk through is that things are now multidimensional, right? So it's, let me, do some MFA, sort of attacks, right? Which allow me to make a phone call. And if I need to, I'll use WhatsApp or I'll throw it to Facebook, right? So it's multi-channel, right? And they know enough about the people that they're trying to engineer, right? To sort of do this process. This is not, some of it, yes, is gun blast, but once hook fish is on the line, then it gets really specific. And, and the data's out there, unfortunately, because of all the other hacks that have happened, right? The data is there to know you.
Switching from MFA a little bit and going over to passwords, which is another one of the key themes this year for Cybersecurity Month. As long as I've been following cybersecurity, it feels like there's an article that appears at least once a year that makes the bold prediction that passwords are going to become extinct. This may be the first year I haven't seen that article. So does that mean, and open to anybody who wants to answer this one, does this mean that passwords are here to stay? And does it mean that people and organizations are finally managing passwords effectively?
I think it's definitely, there may have not been as many articles, but I think the terminology has just changed. When I referenced FIDO2 before, right? That's really pushing for this passwordless future where you're tying it better to the individual and the device that they're logging in from, and you're getting a lot of other benefits as a result. The challenge has always been, and I think still remains and will so for the foreseeable future, is what are the applications that are supporting it? Because it's a two-ended problem. You have to have the ability for the user to be able to authenticate themselves, but you also have to have the applications to support this next generation of authentication where you can go passwordless. And the fact that so many banks are still using SMS, text messages for two-factor authentication should give you an indication of how far behind we are on that. The industry that's getting attacked the most, as Art called out, is lagging behind on MFA. I saw some stat the other day from Okta where 33% of the authentication attempts that are going through them were fraudulent attempts to log into an account, right? And specifically for the finance industry, I think it was 50% of all logins were to try to break into your account. There's no it's 2022, right? Like we are living in a time where we know the attacks that are happening. All these industries really need to step up and make the investment to match that authentication so we can get to that passwordless future. But it takes that investment. And, I think now the pain is starting to happen where now maybe we can get to that point where it's like, okay, everyone's going to go all in on this and commit so that we can have that equilibrium that'll get us to that passwordless future.
I think one of the kind of challenges is that there are so many applications out there that have a username and password tied to it. If you think about the number of applications you sign into during a week, your bank, your education, your recreational stuff, your fantasy football league, everything has a username and password tied to it. Getting to some kind of unified platform so that we can start doing a FIDO type authentication or using WebAuth or something else that is passwordless and not tied to username and password is going to be a little bit of a challenge for the total of companies to approach. On a corporate level, we can do it internally all day because we control that. We can put in an authentication system that uses whatever authentication mechanisms we want for our own internal apps. But when it comes to signing into all the other apps in the world, you're really stuck with what they have. And I can't think of a single one of them that supports any kind of newer authentication mechanism.
One of the other themes we're covering this month is software updates. With regards to software updates, which kind of, as a consumer, it's kind of low-hanging fruit. You update your software whenever you need, when it needs update. What's the main hurdle facing SMEs in ensuring this is a part of their cybersecurity regimen?
They're afraid of patching because they think that patches are going to break their stuff.
Yes.
And is it the burden of the software provider to allay those concerns? Is it something you guys do? Is it a leap of faith? Where can companies go for that confidence?
I think a lot of it's a leap of faith. We're depending on software providers to give us good patches. I'll deploy a patch. I'll download a patch for a firewall and go deploy it. If it bricks that firewall, it means I have to find a way to get there with a new firewall. And with lead times right now with supply chain, it may not be easy to get a new firewall. So that's where really the risk is. We can't run a large enterprise, an SME, on a Walmart router. We have to have real enterprise gear in place. And there's a risk when we're patching that we're going to break whatever's there. We do what we can to test patches with a patch management system, but there's always some kind of weird combination of something that can cause a system to break. So that's what enterprises are really afraid of. And when we're on incident response, almost all the time, we're dealing with a lot of systems that have never been patched. A lot of the companies will turn off patch management on purpose because they don't want to break these critical systems. They don't want to break their enterprise applications by rolling out new SQL Server patches to their environment, and then nothing works the next day. That is something that they're really afraid of. So it's coming from, really the responsibility is coming from the service provider and the software company. But enterprises really need to embrace patching at this point. I view it as a resilience test. So if you have good backups, if you have good snapshots, you have a good way to get back up and running, then just pray and send those patches, because you need to, that's more important than just leaving yourself wide open and being afraid of the patch. Yes, there are some risks, especially on hardware devices like your edge firewall. I can't roll those back if the patch is bad. If I deploy firmware to it and it bricks that device, it's just like your phone that when it's bricked, you might as well just throw it away. And that does pose a risk, and that's what enterprises are scared of. But we're doing what we can as far as just being proactive and patching as often as we can for our clients. But a lot of organizations, especially when they're in their busy time of the year, they will tell us not to patch. And companies that are doing all their retail sales around Christmas time, Black Friday, that kind of thing, they'll tell us not to patch during those months because they don't want to impact their revenue. And that just means if there's a critical thing that happens, if there's a 0 day, it's wide open for those organizations.
Conor, one of the things that I was really grateful you brought up, we were talking yesterday, you talked about immutable backups. What should companies know about immutable backups that they may not know?
I think one of the most important things for me that I scream about all the time, not angry, but, I'm just frustrated, which is around credentials, right? I get people keep talking about backups and immutable backups, which it's important. We want to have immutable backups. But the big thing that we're talking about in here, we just came off the password, discussion, is at the end of the day, you can have a complex and sophisticated preventative system, right? Cybersecurity, you've got the walls up. You could have an elegant backup solution and even a mutable backup solution, right? But if the credentials are exposed or accessible, that's like having a great castle with great walls and great moat, but handing over the key, right? So that's what I think I get frustrated about at times, is like, oh, we've got great software. Okay, but where are the credentials, right? Because you also, in sort of, people weave in along with immutable, the sort of discussion of air-gapped backups, right? And so you want to be thinking about protecting the data and making it so it can be, but also the credentials from being overwritten. So I think a lot of people are confused as to what that means, right? Things are not immutable if you can get into them and delete them. I think the other piece is people may say, well, oh, hey, I've got and this is a sort of more specific example on network, I've got an immutable backup system, or I've got an advanced backup system, right? But it's on the network. And Art and I talked about this earlier today, is I'm always looking at what are the crumbs, Hansel and Gretel, like what are the crumbs that draw the line back to those systems? If they're on network, they can be traversed, they can be traced. You might have a DR site, but if there's a VPN tunnel, you should, hackers will follow that path and find that system. So I think a lot of people need to also make sure those immutable backups are not on network, period. You can have immutable backups on network, but you need to have another set, right, that are somewhere else and actually be testing that stuff. We talk about, you need to do patching, you need to do pen testing on a regular occasions, but people are not saying, well, am I verifying my immutable backups, right? Can I do those types of restores? But I think the other key thing, which is, a policy we have in our business, is we never share the credentials to the immutable backups that we manage. I mean, it's like, sorry, we're not giving them to you. Not if the CEO asks, right? We will do the restoration if need be. And that's part of our service, is actually recovering if need be with the immutable backups. But the credentials, which we've all talked about here, are the holy grail, right? That's the thing that is the most sacred.
Yeah, I think one of the things about immutable backups, there are some great solutions out there that are hardware-based solutions that are, you have an appliance on your network and it is taking backups, and it's really a Linux device, and it has some application that is controlling whether or not that data is immutable, whether or not the backup application will allow you to overwrite it. And applications like Veeam do the same thing. The thing is, if you are hitting that data at a hardware layer, you can still erase the RAID array. You can still do things to affect that data. So the immutability is really only if you're approaching it using its backup application. If you're approaching it using normal protocols, there's always a way with a device to get at that data. So immutability is extremely important right now, especially with ransomware. And most attackers are not sophisticated enough to affect those devices. But that vulnerability, that risk is still there. They're always just servers with storage. And we're calling it immutable because we're doing tricks to make it really hard to change that data. But there's where there's a will, there's a way. So that's the risk going forward. But really, I think when we're talking about immutability, we're talking about having something that's ransomware resistant. And I think there's plenty of immutable solutions that are great, but I encourage, when people are thinking about a immutable backup solution, to pick one that's not in their data center, as Conor said. Pick one that is cloud-based, because when things happen in your data center, we don't want to give signals to the attacker of where your data is living, where your recovery path is. We want the attacker ultimately not to know that you have another copy to work with and that we can restore without them even being aware.
We've covered a lot of topics today, but I wanted to sort of wind things up with sort of something I saw earlier this month. At this year's Dreamforce, Mark Benioff said there's no finish line when it comes to security. How do you instill in your customers this point without losing hope or feeling like they're throwing money into an open pit of despair?
Yeah, I always tell people that security is an indefinite game of survival, right? It's not going to be a destination you're reaching for, right? This is going to be the day-to-day habits that you're building so that you can work towards that continuous improvement to stay secure. And so it is an investment over time, right? This is something where it might seem like you're throwing money away and it's hard to see the return on investment. And I say that as a CISO having to defend a budget every single year and try to figure out how do I really show, the value that we're bringing. But, I think the game has changed a little bit as well, where the threats are front and center for every organization now. right? And maybe if I can be thankful for ransomware for anything, maybe it's that, right? They may have destroyed the world economy with all of their attacks, but at least they brought security to the forefront. That there's a very tangible example of what happens when you don't invest in security. And even from the cyber insurance side, if you're not investing in security, you are going to pay more for cyber insurance because you're a greater risk. And so that's where there's these little clues that you can see along the way that it's not a waste of money. It's just the cost of doing business in the world today, which is sad to say, but that's the reality we live in, right? Unfortunately, we deal with attacks day in and day out. If we didn't have that, there's only a single story that ends like that. It's called a fairy tale. We don't live there, right? Attacks happen. You have to invest in security. It's not a lost cause. It's something that is enabling you to run your business with less risk. And that's the key message there.
I think for our organizations, I try to instill hope because one of the things we pride ourselves on is our clients don't get ransomware, right? That's kind of the history of our business. We've always been screaming about this sort of stuff for a long time. And not all of our clients are there, but we really try to make sure that sort of our minimum viable product has a chance at resilience. And that's how we engage with the customer. But also I like to talk to them a little bit just about sort of it being a continuum, right? And let's just try to get 1% better tomorrow, right? And sort of in some, I just try to use the analogy as sort of like self-care, right? Like, what do you do to protect yourself and take care of yourself every day? You have a routine. There's products and things that you invest in, whether it's meditating or taking a walk or spending time with your family. Like, what are the things that you do? What's your cadence look like for being resilient as a human? And I think we can start to make better analogies for people to sort of see and look at it that way. Then it's not this thing that I don't understand, right? If we can map MDR to human self-care practices, right? If we can, create more storytelling around that, I think it also makes it easier for the average person inside of an organization to sort of understand their role and what the organization's role is. Because, right, in a family, right, you have roles for the family to take care of themselves. In a community, you do. And so I think I try to work on storytelling or analogies like that, but also to sort of calm people down by reminding them that we're on a process here. Like Jason said, this is a journey that we're taking, but sorry, we're going to be on a long walk, right?
I like that we're almost ending on a hopeful note. So, but before we go, I wanted to go around the horn to see if each of you could impart one piece of advice to our viewers today. What would it be? And Art, I'll start with you.
Every time I speak about cybersecurity, I end up at the end of the presentation with everybody ready to go hang themselves. So, I want to make everyone realize that we're kind of in an industry where we see a lot of the worst sometimes, but there is a lot of improvement that you can make. And there's really any step is better than no step. Any MFA solution is better than no MFA solution. Any immutable backup solution is better than no immutable backup solution. So we may be naysayers about certain technology, and it's true there are better ones than others, but anything is better than nothing at this point. So one of the things that I just encourage everybody to do is take a look at the real risks to your business. What's really challenging you in an attack? What are the things that could impact you the most? And really just cover those bases first and keep recursing through it. Never think that you're done. Never think, okay, I'm spending $1 million on this solution and now we're done forever. No, this is an ongoing thing, and you may need more budget later in the year.
Jason?
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of the same there. I think the biggest thing to focus on is security is not a once a year thing, right? You don't go to the gym and do 300 push-ups once a year and expect to be healthy, right? It comes down to what are you doing every single day? And how are you looking at that risk and reducing that over the long run, right? It goes back to what Conor was saying on continuous improvement. So it really comes down to that day-to-day, the blocking and tackling. That's the stuff that's going to make a difference, not your next purchase from a security tool, not your next service, risk assessment you're going to get done. It's how are you taking action and how are you working with your trusted partners to make the difference in your organization? That's the stuff that moves the needle on security.
I posted about this the other day on LinkedIn, which was, I'm hoping for the rise of the chief resilience officer. I think Jason needs a counterpart in his industry, right? There's a CISO. I don't know the acronym, but CRO. I know that's chief revenue officer. We'll figure it out, right? But Jason's got certain tasks, right, that are focused, but there's someone in an organization that also needs to be going through the stand back up cycle, right? Because Jason's identifying where are the risks, where are the potential. Someone has to actually go and say, okay, if these are risks, what are the outcomes if these risks happen? What will it look like? And whether it's a chief resilience officer, a director of resilience, whatever. But the thing that worries me is there's no one in any organization with a title, I'm head of backups. It doesn't exist because usually it's a job by community or by, few guys. Hey, tomorrow night you check on that sort of stuff. So I think that's one thing is like, whose job is it going to be to really be focused on standing back up from the various threats and to practice that? Because even in DR, the old days of DR was like, let's do our quarterly DR test. And now it's like, let's do our quarterly, pen test. It's just, that's not going to be good enough. Someone has to be acting out these things and focused on it. And so that's a place where I think our organization fits in, or at least we try to behave like that just because of what we've seen on the front lines. And I don't wish those situations on anyone.
Thanks, Conor. And Art and Jason, thank you so much for all your insights today. I think everyone watching today has a lot to take away from the session today. And I'm not sure if it's right to wish you a happy Cybersecurity Month or an aware Cybersecurity Month, but thank you all for your time today. And if you have any questions, we're going to post some emails up on the screen so that you can ask any questions you have or reach out to us. But everyone, thank you for your time today.